Bom dia.
Good
A gente está
morning,
começando
everyone.
esse evento num dia muito importante para
We
quem
are
é daqui do
starting
Brasil e
this
eu moro aqui, que é o
event in a
primeiro
very
dia oficial de
important day for
chuva.
those who are here in Brasilia,
A
which
gente
is the
fala do
first day
céu
of
azul de
rain.
Brasília, mas
We
assim,
talk about the
quando
blue
começa a
sky in
chover, quem mora aqui
Brasilia,
sabe que dá uma
but you
desligada, não
know
sei a
who
chuva.
live
Daqui uma
here
semana a gente já cansou,
that when
mas esse
it
primeiro
rains,
dia é
we
muito
get
especial.
really relieved. In a week from
É,
now, we're just
Eu sou
going
a
to be
Maria
tired of the
Pisa,
rain, but this
minha
first day is
empresa
very
é
special.
Aflorar,
My name is
a empresa
Maria
que vai fazer a
Pisa. My company is
facilitação desses dois
Aflorar, the
dias.
company that is going
Daqui a
to
pouco
do
eu
the
já vou
facilitation
apresentar a
for
nossa
these two
equipe. A gente está
days.
com uma equipe de
We're
seis
going
pessoas
to
aqui e
introduce
uma
our team. We
pessoa
have a
online.
6-person team
E
here
a gente
and a
está aqui para
person
cuidar,
online, and we're here to
para
care for you,
cuidar que a gente consiga chegar em consensos, que a gente se
to care
escute,
for reaching
que a gente cuide também um
consensuses,
pouquinho da
to listen
gente.
to one another, to listen
A
to
gente
ourselves.
está a menos de um mês da COP
It has
e está
it
passando um trator, né?
We
Todo
are at
mundo já está no
less than one
trator
month
e quem
from
está
the
na ajuda
COP,
ambiental está vindo um trator.
and
Então, antes de qualquer
it
coisa,
feels
eu
like
quero
we're
convidar a
being
gente
run
para
over by a
chegar.
truck. So I would like
E
to,
aí,
first of all,
fique à vontade, eu queria que a
invite
gente
us
fechasse os olhos
to
um pouquinho, assim,
arrive
30
and be
segundos, só para a
present.
gente dar uma
I'm
chegada.
going to invite you to please close your eyes for
E se
30
você não se sentir à
seconds if you
vontade,
can.
por
And if you
favor,
don't feel
só baixe
comfortable
os
closing
olhos,
your
assim,
eyes,
para
just
ficar
look
um pouco mais
down
com você mesmo,
so that you can
com você
connect to
mesma.
yourself.
Respire esse ar
Breathe
úmido
this
e
humid
aprofunda um
air
pouco a sua respiração para você
and
se
breathe
ocupar
deeper
mais.
so that you can
E se
fill
você
this
pudesse fazer um
space a little
check-in
bit more. It's like
com
you are
você
doing
mesma, de
a
como você
check-in with
está
yourself on
nessa
how you're
manhã de
doing
terça-feira.
this morning, this Tuesday morning.
Como está seu corpo,
How is your body doing?
para a gente não esquecer de se
So we
cuidar
don't
no
forget to
meio
take
dessa
care of
loucura toda,
ourselves in the middle of this
de estar
whole
presente com a gente mesmo, de se escutar.
haze, and not forget to uh,
E
listen to
aí, no
ourselves.
seu tempo, você pode abrir os olhos.
And when you feel comfortable, you can
A
open your
gente
eyes.
está aqui no momento
We
de
are here in a
chegar em quais são os
moment
grandes
of
consensos
reaching
da
the
sociedade
great
civil para se
consensuses
levar para a
of the
COP.
civil society that should be
Então,
taken
é um
to the
momento
COP.
onde a gente
So
tem
this is a
esse
moment
lugar onde
when
cada um está
we
aqui
have
defendendo um
this
bioma, um povo, um saber, uma
group
espécie,
here,
cada
each
um são
person defending a
movimentos e organizações
biome,
com
a
agendas
knowledge, a
diferentes.
species,
E a gente está aqui para encontrar
different
o nosso
agendas from
ponto em
different
comum, ou os
organizations, and
nossos
we're here
pontos
to find
comuns.
our common
Quais
ground
são
or
as
our common
agendas que a gente
grounds,
pode levar sabendo
which
que a
will
gente
be
está
the agendas that we
respaldado
can take to the
por
COP
esse
knowing
coletivo de
that we are
organizações?
supported
Quais
by
são os
this collective
lugares
of
onde a gente sabe que está
organizations,
todo
and
mundo
in
na
what
mesma
places
pauta e
we
a gente
know
pode falar
everyone
em
is on the
nome
same page
dessas
and we
200
can
pessoas que
speak
vão
on
se unir
behalf
a
of
nós
these
nesse
200
evento.
people that are
E daí,
going to
claro,
gather
terão
us in
outras
this
agendas,
event.
outras pautas,
Of
que
course,
serão
we're going to
suas e
have
de
other
outras.
agendas and
E
other
a gente também quer
um,
que essas outras
topics,
agendas e
and
potências
we
também
also
sejam
want these
articuladas
other
aqui.
agendas to be
Então, eu
articulated here.
vou trazer aqui.
So I'm going to
Fica mais fácil de ver os textos nas telas laterais, tá?
project
Então, eu
here
sou a
on the
Maria
screen.
Pisa,
It is easier
facilitadora.
to
Está aqui
read
comigo
the text
Marina
on the side screens. My
e
name is Maria
Nayara.
Pisa. I
Somos
have
três
with me Marina and
facilitadoras.
Nayara. We're three
Na
facilitators
relatoria,
today.
temos a
In
Andrea,
reporting, we
a
have
Rangel, nosso
Andrea.
diretor de gestão de informação e
Rangel is
patrimônio, para que tudo
our
isso vire um painel de facilitação
Director
gráfico,
of
vire um
Information
relatório, vire um anexo
Management. He is
robusto. E a
caring
Júlia, que
for
qualquer
everything to
coisa que vocês
become a
precisarem,
report and a
nossa
chart
mão
and an
direita, mas
annex. And
ela vai ser nosso
Julia is
apoio.
our left and
E
right
como eu
hand,
falei,
so
a gente
she's
tem
going
dois
to be
grandes
our
objetivos
support.
aqui hoje. Então, o
And
primeiro
as
é
I said,
chegar
we
nesses
have two
grandes
great objectives
consensos,
here today.
e aí
The
essa
first one
postura
is to
nossa de
reach
buscar
these
esses
great
pontos de
consensuses
conexão,
in our
de
uh,
cooperação, de ativação de
attempt to look
parcerias, e
for
esse lugar
partnerships
justamente
and
de
connection
vocês, nós nos
points
conectarmos.
and
Então, a gente vai
connect
ter
with each
cafés de
other.
meia
So we're
hora,
going to
a gente
have
tem um
coffee
almoço de
breaks
uma
of
hora e
half an
meia, depois a
hour.
gente vai
We're
ter um
having a
coquetel de
lunch
2
for one
horas,
hour and a
para a
half.
gente
This
se
evening, we're going to
conectar,
have a
para a
cocktail
gente
for
se
two
ativar,
hours
se
to connect with each
fortalecer
other,
essa rede
to
para chegar
strengthen
nas
this
COPs
network
nessa força. E
so
aí,
that we
depois do
can
nosso
get to the
coquetel, a
COP
gente
this
subir a
strong.
régua. A gente
Remember
está
our
acostumado a
role
trabalhar
of
com o
raising the
governo. O
bar.
governo ele
We're
tem
usually
você vai
we,
tomar um
we
café da
usually
manhã que
work with
eles
the
têm até
government,
onde eles conseguem
and
ir
they
enquanto
have
governo. Quem
the
sobe essa
extent that they
régua,
can go
quem
as a
traz a
government,
população ao
and those who
farol
raise this
para
bar, those
realmente
who
aumentar
bring
essas
this
emissões é a
compass,
sociedade civil.
is
Então,
to
esse
is
tom
the
que eu quero
civil
que a gente traga
society.
de
So this
subir
is
essa
the
régua
tone that I
para
would
não
like us
deixar
to take,
passar o que for
raising the
imprescindível
bar so
dessa
that
audiência
we
do
don't
campeonato da
um,
nossa crise climática.
neglect what is inevitable to be
Não
discussed in
vou
our
me
climate
detalhar nessa
crisis at this
programação, vocês
point.
já
I'm not going to go
receberam, a
into
gente
further
tem uma
detail
manhã
on this
agora para
schedule.
leitura, então a
You
gente
already
entra no lugar
received
do
it. This
contexto da
morning, we're going to have
COP,
an
10 anos de
opening.
COP,
We're going
até
to talk
chegar com a
about the 10
papel da
years of
sociedade
COP
civil,
and what is the
e
role of
também
civil
depois a gente vai
society
para
and the opening of this event. And then we're
dois
going
diálogos
to
simultâneos que vão
two
convidar todos vocês a
simultaneous
serem
dialogues that are
palestrantes,
going to invite all
painelistas,
of you to
no
be
formato altamente
lecturers and
participativo. Um sobre
panelists.
as
Is highly
NDCs, aquela grande ambição,
participatory.
e
One
um
of them is about
sobre,
the
agora
NDCs
falar
and
mal de
this
memória,
ambition
sobre a
gap.
parte de
And the
natureza,
other
qual que
one
é o papel,
speaks
cadê
of
a floresta e a
nature. What is the
biodiversidade
role
na
of nature?
COP30.
Where is
Daí a
forest and
gente tem almoço e
biodiversity in
depois a gente vai para
COP30?
mais dois
Then we're going to
diálogos
have a lunch.
simultâneos. Um
And
sobre
then we
financiamento
have two other
climático e um
simultaneous
sobre energia e
dialogues, one
transição, um
about
longo discurso
climate
sobre jovens.
finance, and the
Quando
other one is about
acontecem esses
transition
diálogos
away from fossil
simultâneos,
fuels.
você vai
When
escolher
these
qual são
simultaneous
as que
dialogues
vai, uma é
happen, you're
aqui,
going to
a outra na
choose
outra
which
área,
room
mas
you're
enfim, vai
going to.
direcionar
One of
vocês.
them is here, the other
Mas
one
vocês
is
também não precisam ter
going to
escolhido
be down the hall,
entre
or
um
team
desses
is
dois
going to take
temas.
you there, but you're
Depois à
going to
tarde a
have
gente
to
vai ter
choose
as
with
perguntas
among
e a
these two,
resposta sobre
between
as
these two
nossas, a
topics. And
reconexão
in the
latino-americana das
afternoon, we're
Cilas
going to get
Climas.
to know the
E amanhã
campaign. The
a
answer
gente
is
tem mais um
us from
resumo,
Sila
análise
Klimos.
até COP, e
And
vamos ter mais
tomorrow we
dois
have
diálogos,
another
um sobre
summary
transição
and
justa
analysis
e um
about the
sobre
SCOP, and two
adaptação.
other dialogues, one on just
Para tudo isso
transition and another
acontecer,
on
eu preciso
adaptation.
que a gente tenha
In
alguns
order for this to
acordos,
happen, I
tradução
need
simultânea, como eu
us to have
disse,
some
em
agreements.
espanhol,
We have
português, pela
simultaneous
fala, gente
interpretation,
lendo
as I said,
espanhol.
in English
Qualquer
and
dificuldade
Spanish.
nessa
We're going to
tradução, por
have
favor,
speeches in
pegue, eu vou
English
fazer
and
para vocês.
Spanish. If you find it
A
hard to
gente vai ter
understand, you can
muitos
get your
momentos de
receivers.
participação e é
We're
importante
going
que
to
a sua
have a
fala
lot of
seja
moments of
objetiva. São somente
participation, and it's
os
very
oradores têm 3
important
minutos
that
para
this
falar.
speech
Então,
is
a gente tem que
very
trazer
objective and
sequência. A
straightforward.
gente
You're
pode
going to have
voltar
3
para falar
minutes to
depois, mas
speak.
construir esse
So let's
programa
try to be
breve, em
concise and bring
minutos,
our ideas
com
in
uma
this
escuta
3 minutes.
generosa para a gente escutar opiniões
We should
diversas, pontos de
be
vista
generous when
diferentes e
listening
a
to
gente
different
poder acolher
perspectives so that we
e, quem
can
sabe, mudar de
welcome
opinião sobre aquele
different
ponto,
opinions, maybe
numa
changing
linguagem
our
inclusiva.
our
Então, a
opinions on
gente vai
that
fazer
topic
alguma
with
sigla,
inclusive
não
language.
assuma que você
So
não sabe.
if you are
Por
going to
favor,
talk
traduza
about
para
an
os líderes,
acronym, please
para que a gente
translate it
consiga
and
sempre ficar todo
explain
mundo na
so that
mesma
we can
página. Por
guarantee
exemplo,
that
falando
everyone
GGA,
is on the same
GGHG, é
page.
importante que a gente
Because
bem
sometimes we
fácil que
use
ainda não está
GGA
sabendo
and
desses termos.
GHG, and not everyone knows about
É,
all the terms.
por favor, quem puder
Please,
silenciar os computadores,
uh,
especialmente no momento dos
if
aquários
you
e das
can,
flores, deixar de
especially
lado para a
during
gente
the
ficar
fishbowl
focado nesse momento de
activities, we
construção
should leave
coletiva.
aside our
Obrigado por
smartphones,
ouvi-nos,
our
ouvirem
laptops,
pelas
and we
atividades com
should be
tempo de
careful with
duração
time.
que a gente vai
We
conversar
have the
enquanto
different
isso.
timings for the different
E é isso.
activities,
A
and we
gente
are
vai
going to
fazer um
take care
combinado
of
amanhã,
that.
mas que quando a gente chegar
And
no aquário,
when we
faça.
get to the fishbowl, we
E agora eu
have
quero convidar a Cíntia
other
Feitosa,
rules,
como
and I'd like
idealizadora
to
do
invite
site,
Cynthia
convidá-la a falar.
Feitosa for the official opening.
Bom dia a todas e todos, eu sou
Good
Cíntia
morning,
Feitosa,
everyone. I'm
especialista na
Cynthia
Estratégia Internacional
Feitosa.
de
I am
Sustentabilidade. A gente tem
expert
uma
on
alegria
international
organizar esse
strategy at the
11º
Institute
momento
for
de
Climate and
encontro com civil
Society, and it's a
society
great
de várias
joy to
regiões do
organize
país
this
e do
last
mundo
meeting
antes
on
da COP.
with
A gente
civil
sabe que
society
tem sido uma
with
trajetória
Brazil and the world
difícil aí
before
para a sociedade
COP30.
civil,
It's
em
a journey
especial
that is
brasileira, eu
difficult
diria,
for
mas sempre falo
civil
que a
society,
presidência
especially
da
in
COP
Brazil. We
é do
always
nosso
say
governo, é
that the
oficial, mas a
presidency
sociedade brasileira
belongs to
também tem
our
feito
government,
um
but
papel de
also civil
presidente
society
que não tem sido
has been
fácil, mas a gente tem
developing
aprendido
this
muito no
role of
caminho.
presidency as
Esse
well.
evento é
It's
organizado
not
por um
easy.
grupo
We've been
grande de
learning a lot,
organizações,
and
justamente
this group
para
is
tentar
organized by
trazer os
different
conceitos já foram
organizations to
construídos
bring
e
the
incluir
concepts that were
mais e mais
built,
pessoas
including
nesse
more and
caminho
more
até a
people in
COP.
this journey to
A gente
COP.
fala que
We
esse caminho
say
desse
that
Belém foi
the
pavimentado
journey
muito antes e o caminho
to
COP30
Belém
também vai
was
continuar,
paved
então tá
well
um
before,
alívio,
and
porque
after
a
Belém, we are
COP30 não
going
é um
to go
momento
on.
de
So it's a
chegada, não é a
relief
linha
to
de
know
chegada,
that this is
e
not
que as
the
COPs são um
the
processo. Então não
finish
existe uma
line,
COP que é uma linha de
and
prata, claro que
COP
não. Tem
is not is a
expectativas sobre o
process.
Brasil,
We don't
para
have a silver
celebração de
bullet.
10 anos do
Of
Acordo
course,
de
there's a
Paris.
lot of
Muito a
expectation on
celebrar, mas também
Brazil
muitas
when we are
frustrações
celebrating
a
10
respeito das
years of the
negociações,
Paris Agreement.
que é
We have a
como
lot
que a
to
gente vai
celebrate,
conseguir
but we have many
consolidar
concerns
alguns posicionamentos de
about
algumas nações, além de
implementation, and
você
then we
conquistar
should
algumas posições
consolidate
e ter um
some
espaço
alignments,
o mais
some
acolhedor
views,
possível
and we
para
wanted
também
to
ser um
be
momento
as welcome as possible so that we can work and rest, because we still have a long journey until Belém. Without further ado, I'd like to invite you to welcome Selwyn Hart, our special keynote. He's the special advisor to the United Nations Secretary General on Climate Action and Just Transition, and he's going to bring the opening remarks. So this intervention is going to be in English. So if you need simultaneous translation, please grab your devices. And then we're going to listen to the Minister Sonia Guajajara, the Minister of Indigenous Peoples and leader of the Indigenous Circle of COP30. So I'd like to invite Mr. Selwyn Hart to come to the stage.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here in Brasilia with you. And Minister, as I just told you, I'm happy to share this stage with you. Your very principled approach to many of the challenges that we face, and your voice has been such a powerful force over the course of the last few years or so. And of course, my friend Carlos Lopes, the former executive secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa. And I'm seeing so many familiar faces and friends. So this is the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. And we say that every COP since Paris is the most important COP since the finalization of the Paris Agreement. And I'm not going to break that trend, but this COP is truly a consequential COP. And the context within which it is taking place makes its outcome even more critical. We're at a moment where geopolitical divisions and tensions are on full display, and international consensus and rulemaking is under stress, and the institutions that were created to problem solve are also increasingly under stress. We're seeing in many countries the rise of right-wing populism, where climate, a decade ago was seen as an issue that united societies. Climate is now being used as a wedge issue to divide societies. And we're seeing a massive leadership vacuum on climate at the international level. Some of the countries and regions that we have traditionally depended on to lead politically and lead with bold action really are now retreating from that position of leadership. So on the politics are not good. At a moment when the world needs to come together and be bold and ambitious and support each other and to cooperate, we're seeing these fissures and tensions, and climate, unfortunately, is sliding down the political priority list in many of the major countries. On the science has never been clear. And we're seeing across the world an acceleration of climate impacts, catastrophic climate impacts, as the world crosses or approaches very dangerous tipping points. So the science is very clear. We need to act now, and we need to act with the highest level of ambition. On the economics, the economics, quite frankly, are a lot better than they were 10 years ago. And when you look at the renewables revolution as an example or an indicator, 10 years ago, it took 1 week to deploy 1 gigawatt of solar. Last year, it took 19 hours. Right? So we're seeing an acceleration of the clean energy revolution. 10 years ago, less than 1% of all new vehicles sold was an electric vehicle. Last year, it was 21%. So we're seeing the rapid deployment, investment patterns around the world have shifted towards a clean energy economy that we had only started to dream about 10 years ago. Of course, it is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. We're still not going fast enough on the deployment of the clean energy solutions, and the rates of deployment and the rates of investment are highly concentrated in a few countries and regions. Since the Paris Agreement, only one out of every $5 invested in clean energy have been invested in developing and emerging economies outside of China. So $1 in countries representing 2/3 of the global population. And this unevenness and injustice in the clean energy transition is manifested most in Africa, where it has 60% of the world's best solar potential, 30% of the minerals critical for the energy transition, and just 2% of clean energy investments. So while the economics are trending in the right direction, we're definitely not there yet, and it's absolutely critical that we ensure that we pick up the pace of the clean energy transition, but at the same time, we also need to infuse justice and fairness so that all countries and all regions benefit. So I first wanted to start with this context setting before launching in very briefly. I know I don't have a lot of time on why this COP is such a consequential COP and why your voices matter, given where the world is on the politics, on the science, and on the economics of the climate crisis. On September 24th, in this very difficult political context, the Secretary General and President Lula convened a meeting of leaders, primarily to serve as a platform for leaders to announce their new nationally determined contributions. The NDCs are at the heart of the Paris Agreement, and one of the key deliverables this year is to receive new NDCs from all parties to the Paris Agreement. Up until that point, less than 30 parties to the Paris Agreement had submitted their NDCs. That summit, in our view, it represented a major milestone, and it has provided a major boost to this pre-COP, but also to COP30 itself. At the summit in New York, 125 parties have now either formally submitted, or they made announcements on their new NDCs. These countries represent around 80% of the world's emissions. We had 36 heads of state and government participating. So despite the geopolitical tensions and divisions, there is still clearly a commitment from the vast majority of leaders to multilateralism, to the Paris Agreement, and to climate action. So how do we harness this in an extremely positive way heading into this really important and consequential COP? What is also clear is that when you look at the ambition level of the new NDCs, they're not adding up. They're not adding up to the 1.5 degree pathway that we are presently on. So while the politics, as bad as it is it has improved somewhat, science is telling us that everyone needs to do much, much better. And the reality is that not all countries are starting from the same starting point. And this is a very clear recognition that we need. This is a clear acknowledgement that we need to be 100% certain about. for developing and emerging economies, or for most developing and emerging economies, they will need a conducive and a supportive international environment, not only for ambition raising, but for hardcore implementation. And therefore, the SCOP needs to respond to these needs. It needs to acknowledge the good progress that has been made. We now have most countries who are coming forward with their new climate plans. The quality of these plans are much better. Many of them have been developed with multi-stakeholder processes where civil society, the business sector were involved in their development. Many of them now cover the entire economy. Many of them have involved key ministries, finance, planning, etc. So it will be critical that the developing countries in particular are supported in the implementation of these new NDCs. So while the response needs to be honest, we're not on target, there needs to be also a response on the finance related issues. So yes, we need a response to the NDCs, but finance will be key, and having this enabling condition applied will be key. We also know that the adaptation situation is getting worse, and for the Secretary General, climate justice is an extremely important pillar of his overall climate strategy. And it will be critical that climate justice is also at the heart of the response to where the world is in the implementation of the NDCs. And what does this mean in very practical terms? It means ensuring that adaptation, which despite the progress over the course of the last 10 years, now rises significantly as a political priority. We know that adaptation finance has traditionally lagged behind financing for mitigation. But as the real impact of climate disasters unfold, it will be critical that there's a much greater focus on protecting people and saving livelihoods. So your role and our collective responsibility has to be ensure that yes, we need to focus on the mitigation picture, but climate justice is equally, and I would say probably even more important. So adaptation, loss and damage, the just transition, these are issues that must also figure prominently in the response to where the world is. Finally, it will be critical that as we look back at the last decade of the Paris Agreement, we've done some really good things. The cost of renewables have increased. Climate it remains an international priority. COP30 really needs to be a moment that sets us up for the next decade. And we know that if we are to have a fighting chance of keeping the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement, we need a COP to set a bold agenda for the next decade, an agenda of implementation, an agenda of delivery, and an agenda of acceleration. And we need acceleration on all fronts. We need acceleration on emission cuts. We need acceleration to end deforestation. We need acceleration on climate justice. So your role will be absolutely critical. You've always been the conscience of the climate process. I really urge you to continue to hold all of us to account, hold governments to account, hold the international organizations to account, and really continue to play that really important role of being the conscience of the global response to the climate crisis. We also need you to continue to pilot the solutions that are readily available. Not everything can be piloted or deployed at a national scale, but do it in your communities, in your villages and the places where, and your cities, the places where you are currently engaged. And finally, I really urge all of you to ensure that science remains at the center of this response. We are very worried that science is increasingly under attack. The spread of mis and disinformation is absolutely rampant, and we need to ensure that science remains at the global response and also the national responses to the climate crisis. So thank you so much. Sorry that I've been so long, but I really look forward to seeing you in Belém and really continue the excellent work that you have done. Hold the feet of governments, the international organizations, all of us continue to hold our feet to the fire, because more than ever, we need your voices and we need your leadership, but we also need your energy and your inspiration. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Mr. We will take an official picture with the minister. E agora eu gostaria de chamar a ministra Sônia Guajajara, ministra dos Povos Indígenas do Brasil e líder do Círculo dos
Now I would
Povos.
like to invite Minister Sonia Guajajara, the Minister of Indigenous People of Brazil. We're going to take an official photo and then you're going to do your intervention, okay? Thank you very much for being here.
Muito grande desse jeito, eu acho. Olá, minha gente, bom dia a todas,
Hello,
a todos e
everyone. Good
todas.
morning, everyone.
Bom, eu olho aqui
At you from here, and I feel comfortable to speak a little bit more comfortable than I should, so please keep track of my time. I say this because I see a lot of people that I have been with throughout this whole time that I take part in climate conferences. That is why I say that I'm very comfortable. I would like to thank you all for the invitation and for this moment. We're knocking on the door of our expected conference that generated a lot of expectations, not only in Brazil, but all over the world. And we see a lot of challenges for us to have, in fact, a concrete delivery in COP30. I think philanthropy does a lot in terms of mobilizing, discussing, presenting contributions. But I think we can do a lot more. So we can have more pressure and we can have more adjustments so that we can manage to get real outcomes and the legacy that we want to leave for this COP30. As Minister of the Indigenous Peoples and now President of the Cycle of the Peoples, we have organized a few initiatives to guarantee the participation of Indigenous peoples. And I always like to remind myself of my first COP and how we advanced with the Indigenous participation in these spaces. And it may seem simple, but for us Indigenous peoples, participation is an important delivery. We are not only present, but we are also occupying the spaces by advocating. I remember in 2009 when I participated in the first COP in Copenhagen. The first time that I felt that cold, I cried so many times. I really cried from how cold I was. I left Manaus to go to Copenhagen. You can imagine how hot it is in Manaus and how cold it is in Copenhagen. And I stayed in in Sweden. I was desperate to get a bus or a train or a subway or a car. I I liked to say that staying in Malmo was a mistake at the time, and I didn't understand a lot. I couldn't grasp what this gigantic event was. At the same time, there's no space for you to speak anywhere because someone else is speaking. Our dear and late Lúcio Terenas told me, Sonia, we have to concentrate and focus here, or else we're going to walk the whole day and we're not going to see anything and we're only going to feel the cold. And with IPAN, I'm still very thankful for IPAN, the first organization that invited me and took me to COP. IPAN's the Institute of Environmental Research of the Amazon, and also CNS at the time. The three of us were trying to ask for 3 minutes or 5 minutes in roundtables where we had acquaintances so that we could do a small talk. We can say a few words. And when we look back, we can see how much we qualified ourselves and how much we guaranteed our presence. At that moment, I was very disturbed about the lack of indigenous people present there. We were about 5 or 6 people. I was restless with trying to guarantee the indigenous presence and organize ourselves and understand the topics and to ensure our participation. In the COP in Lima in Peru, I was with Fernanda Repan, and we did a indigenous training process in Brazil. We brought together the 6 Brazilian biomes in Brasilia. We did a training program in different stages here, and we arrived at COP with a few scheduled events, with the press conference. We organized the indigenous participation in a better way. In Paris, when the Paris Agreement was signed, we already achieved an important result, an important outcome, which was this inclusion of the recognition and acknowledgement of indigenous peoples and local communities as scientific knowledge. This knowledge should be linked to scientific knowledge, and we achieved it. For us, that was an important outcome. And then the platform of indigenous peoples and local communities was created, and it's being improved every year to count on the participation of indigenous peoples and local communities. And we are there to ensure these vacancies for the participation of traditional communities. The platform also gathers every year with Substa, bringing our contribution of local communities and indigenous people. So this is part of our path to get to this point where we are here. In Dubai and COP28, we managed to have a big indigenous participation from all over the world. In Dubai, we had 350 indigenous peoples from all over the world and 100 indigenous peoples from Brazil. So we celebrated this indigenous representation with the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples. We organized this presence through AMPI, COIAB, APIB, with partner indigenous organizations and associations, and we could take 100 indigenous peoples from Brazil. At the end of the COP, when we looked at the report, they said that we had one indigenous person for every 7 oil and gas lobbyists. We are still very few. We have to overcome Dubai now. We have to overcome Dubai in many aspects. COP from Brazil has to really be the COP of participation. And after Dubai, we started organizing this indigenous participation in different levels. We executed a process that is called the co-relative cycle, because the indigenous peoples call one another relatives, with 16 meetings in Brazil. We went to the north, northeast, south, southeast regions in the Amazon. We had a meeting in each state, informing and talking about COP, because a news piece showed that 70% of the Brazilian society never heard about the COP. So, let alone the indigenous peoples. So we did this training program, and we chose representatives to go to this COP. And we also struggle to guarantee accreditation in the blue zone. So we're going to have at least 360 indigenous peoples directly registered and accredited in this partnership between AMPI and the indigenous associations. This is a great step, because we're going to be inside the blue zone with this representation. And as the circle of peoples, we're going to have a space in the green zone where we're going to share this space and agenda with Afro-descendant communities, family, farmers, and traditional communities, because the cycle of the cycle of the peoples gathers all of the representational instances of the indigenous movement, both in global and national movements, and local communities, Afro-descendant communities, and family farmers. So these two commissions are joined in the Green Zone and the Circle of the Peoples Summit, where we're going to have agendas that are specific for each segment. We are also organizing our own village in Belém. So we don't take away hotel rooms from anybody. We're going to have in UFPA, the Federal University of Pará, what we are calling the COP Village, to welcome at least 3,000 indigenous people. So we're going to have 360 indigenous peoples that are going to be accredited. We're going to have guests from the organizations, and we're thinking about having at least 500 Brazilian indigenous peoples in our village and 3,000 in the COP village. They will participate in the Green Zone and the People Summit and all of the parallel agendas that are going to happen over there. This is for us an important delivery. And we have the challenges, which are making this COP the implementation COP. We know that in addition to the financial resources that are always mentioned as the main problem, we have the political challenges. Some things are not solved by money. We also have ethical challenges, as Minister Marina always talks about. As indigenous peoples, here in Brazil, we have built the indigenous NDC. We're going to present now our NDC and the Interministerial Council of Climate Change, the Interministerial Panel of Climate Change, IPCC. And it's important to have in Brazil's NDCs the indigenous peoples' territories, forests, because these words didn't even show up before. And with this articulation, we were able to add them. What we want now is that this agenda is included in the climate mitigation agendas, including the demarcation of indigenous lands as a mitigation measure and the protection of territories as a mitigation measure, as well as climate policies. Understanding territorial protection not only as command and control, but also the operations of removal of invaders, either illegal land grabbers and illegal miners. And in this topic of territorial protection, we consider the actions that we have carried out in 9 indigenous territories of removing these invaders. All of these areas where the invaders were removed brought a significant percentage to the reduction of deforestation in the Amazon. So we already have this as a concrete result, as a concrete outcome added to the bigger outcome of reducing deforestation. So consequently, the emissions were reduced as well with this control of the territory. We have this proved contribution that the indigenous territories give to the climate balance that we are seeking. We have said many times that this COP needs to be good. We are in a dangerous moment when countries are ceasing to see as a priority the combat against the climate crisis and prioritizing ammunition and weapons to finance wars. This is a very unfair competition, and that is why it's very important to continue talking about what we need as national measures, but also always talk about the fight against climate denialism, the fight against fake news. We have to appreciate the integrity of information because we cannot simply consider that an articulation from us is going to work when we have the advance of extreme right in the world. We have to think about how to ensure the measures, but also how to ensure the democracies of the world and face the advancement of this extreme right the way that it is doing. And we are confident because now, with our COP village, with 3,000 indigenous peoples, with an organized participation in all of the spaces, the cycle of the peoples in the green zone, the participation of the accredited indigenous peoples in the blue zone, and we also have Ankarikatu, which is this initiative to train indigenous peoples in global leadership. We also are going to count on their participation at COP, and they will participate directly in the negotiation rooms. Because we understood that it's not enough to have the presence of indigenous peoples like I was in Copenhagen. We need to occupy the spaces, we need to do advocacy, we need to have our voices heard. That is why we're saying that this COP in Brazil, this COP in the Amazon, is going to be the biggest and best COP in participation and protagonism of indigenous peoples. Thank you very much.
Bom dia a todos. Eu sou Alexandre
Good morning,
Prado.
everyone. My name is Alexandre Prado. I lead the climate change department at WWF Brazil. I would like to thank the previous speakers. They set us in a different level of discussion, definitely, and they already set the path for the next 2 days. As it was said here, this is a meeting of the civil society, and we want to propose a pathway forward to the COP and what we're going to bring as considerations, what we want to be our red flags in this COP30. After 3 years of having COPs where in countries where the civil society did not have room, we have the possibility of getting to Brazil and set a milestone. How we're going to get to Belém and how we're going to leave Belém from here forward. How we're going to look at COP30 and see it as a different process. This process that Minister Sonia talked about, what she saw from Copenhagen to Belém, is what we're going to see in 10 years after Belém, either in engagement in the streets or change in advocacy of what is being negotiated and implemented. Now I'm going to invite Marcio Astrini. He's going to conduct this panel about the participation of civil society. Marcio, welcome.
Obrigado, bom dia.
Thank
Bom dia,
you.
ministra.
Good morning, Minister.
Passou frio em Copenhague, mas vai passar um calor danado.
It was cold in Copenhagen, but it's going to be hot in Belém, right?
Mudança climática.
Climate change.
Muito bem, bom dia. Muito obrigado pela
Good
presença de
morning.
todo mundo.
Thank you for coming
Eu queria
to
só
this
começar
event.
fazendo
I'd like to start by
agradecimento especial às organizações que
thanking
se
the
uniram
different organizations who got together so that we could have this event today. Greenpeace, ICS, Talanoa, La Clima, CIPO Platform, TNC, Transforma, WWF. Alexandre just
Obrigado. É muito
talked
importante
about
para a
them
gente estar
now.
aqui.
It's very important for us to be here.
As conferências de clima,
The climate
elas são, na
conferences
verdade, grande processo, né?
are a great process.
Parecem que apenas acontecem em 2 semanas,
They
mas na
seem to
verdade elas estão
happen in 2
acontecendo
weeks, but in
normalmente ao
reality,
longo do ano,
they
elas não param.
take
Termina uma conferência, a gente já
all
começa
year long.
debate para outras. E
We,
a gente tem a
when we
oportunidade
end a
nessas
conference, we
conferências
start a debate for the
sempre
next one, and we always
de
have the
ter
opportunity in
resultado
these
para além
conferences
das
to
2
have a
semanas.
result beyond
E
the
eu
2
gostaria de
weeks.
destacar esse
And I would like to
resultado
highlight
que nós temos a
this
oportunidade de ter
result
para o Brasil
that
hoje.
we
Nós nunca
have
sabemos como uma
the
COP
opportunity
termina.
to bring to Brazil
Às vezes a
today.
gente não sabe
We
nem como
never
ela
know how a
começa,
COP is going to end.
mas a gente
Sometimes we don't
nunca
even
sabe
know
como
how it's
termina.
going to
Mas
start,
nessa COP
but
eu
we
posso
never know how
dizer
it's
com
going to
toda a
end.
segurança
But at
que
this
nós já
COP, I could
temos
say
resultado
with
muito
certainty that we
interessante
have a very interesting
fora da
result
área de negociação, com a
outside of the
mobilização da sociedade
negotiating
civil
area, that
no
is the
Brasil, na
mobilization of
América
civil
Latina,
society
a
in Brazil,
quantidade de
Latin
debates,
America,
a
with the
quantidade de
amount
movimentos
of
de
debates
pessoas,
and
de
movements and
coalizões que se
people,
juntaram à agenda do clima
coalitions that got
exatamente para que
together in the
exista uma
climate
conferência
agenda
no Brasil.
precisely
Isso
because we
é
are
um
going to
ganho
have
gigantesco
a
para a
COP at
agenda,
Brazil. And
independente
this is
do que
huge
acontecer
for
como
the agenda,
resultado das
regardless
negociações.
of
Isso,
the
portanto, é algo
negotiating
extremamente
results.
importante. Não quer
So
dizer que a
this
gente se
is very
contenta com
important.
isso, nós
It
queremos
doesn't
isso
mean
e
that
também
this is
o
enough.
resultado das
We want that
negociações.
and the
Mas
outcomes from
é
the
algo que eu
negotiation.
gostaria de reconhecer.
But that's something I'd like to recognize
A
here.
gente vai começar agora um painel para
We're going
falar
to
de forma
start now
geral
with this
sobre
panel to
COP,
talk about
expectativas
COP,
da sociedade
pre-COP,
civil.
civil
Mas tem
society
uma coisa que
expectations.
eu gostaria de chamar todo mundo à
But
reflexão
I'd like to
do
call you
quanto que
to
o
this
mundo mudou
reflection. How much
nesses
the
últimos
world has
3 anos,
changed in
desde que o
the
Brasil
last three
submeteu
years
lá no Egito, em Sharm
since
el-Sheikh, a
Brazil
sua vontade
submitted
de
its
sediar a COP. O
will
presidente
to
Lula tinha
be
acabado de
the
ser
host
eleito.
of COP
A gente
in
vinha
Egypt,
de
in
um
Sharm
período muito
el-Sheikh.
difícil no Brasil, inclusive com a
President
recusa
Lula
do
had
governo anterior
just
de
been
fazer a COP
elected. It was a
em
very
2019,
difficult
então foi também
moment
uma
because
resposta a essa
the
recusa.
the
E o
previous
presidente Jair Milei,
administration
antes de
didn't want to
assumir a
have
presidência
COP
da
here
República,
in Brazil.
mas já ganho a
So
eleição,
the
ele
President Lula,
submeteu à
after
vontade do
winning the
Brasil e o
elections,
mundo mudou
before
muito
taking over,
a partir
he
disso.
he
Né?
he
Não mudou
accepted
apenas
that,
a
and
agenda
the
de
world
clima,
has
mas mudou
changed a
muito de
lot
forma geral.
from then
A
on.
gente tem
In general,
todas
not
as
only on
guerras
climate,
acontecendo,
we
o
have many
genocídio em
wars
Gaza,
happening, the
nós
genocide in
temos
Gaza.
a
We
eleição
have
de um inimigo da
the
agenda
election of this
climática
enemy
para a presidência da
of the
maior
climate
potência
agenda, being the
econômica e
president
militar
of
do
the
planeta,
greatest
nos Estados Unidos,
economic and military powerhouse in the planet. In our agenda, we had a disaster, the end of the climate conference in Baku, and all the consequences that we still face because we had the closure of this debate on finance and with all the problems we've been facing in the conduction of the agenda of this conference. So we have many challenges, challenges that were big before the submission of Brazil and are much greater now. So for us to start this debate, we are going to have this panel here. It's a panel that is going to discuss the issues concerning the negotiation on climate, concerning the blue zone agenda, and things that are outside of the negotiating agenda. And this is very important for us to highlight. We have subjects such as the low ambitions of the NDCs and fossil fuels that are not in the negotiation agenda right now, and they are crucial points if we want to have any advancement in the climate agendas. Other points that are in the negotiating agenda, such as just transition, adaptation, but we don't have the clarity on how this is going to be conducted. So we are going to have many issues that are open to discussion, and we are going to bring people to provide the answers, providing hope for this debate. So I'd like to call to the stage in this discussion on hope. I'd like to call Annabella Rosenberg from Climate Action Network. Please, Annabella, come up to the stage. Rude Rafael, representative of the Political Commission of the People Summit. He is from the Homeless Movement in Brazil, MTST, and we also have Pilar Bueno Rubial from Argentina 1.5 Movement. Thank you, Pilar, and Carlos Lop, COP30 Special Envoy for Africa. Thank you so much.
Muito bem. Então, como vocês não sabem, mas nós já conversamos antes.
We've talked before.
Todos nós cinco
All of us.
Está tudo acertado. Portanto, vocês já sabem, precisamos
you know how it works.
Nessa ordem, né, de preferência.
Esperança e resposta. We need hope and answers in 7 minutes. I think that's more than enough. And we are going to conduct in this way. We are going to pass the mic to each one of you. You have 7 minutes to introduce the items, and then we are going to open for questions and remarks, and then we are going to bring the mic back to you.
Senhor, obrigado.
Thank you.
Então, só lembrando, o idioma que vocês vão usar é o idioma que vocês sentem mais confortável.
You may speak in the language you prefer. We have translation, so please speak in your language. Should we start with you, Annabella?
Eu não sei. Buenos días a todos. Voy a hablar en
Good
castellano.
morning, everyone. I'm going to speak in Spanish because I don't want to insult the interpreters or the Portuguese language. My name is not Annabella Rosenberg anymore. It's Annabella Rosenberg. So my name changed after I came to Brasilia. So it's a great pleasure to be with you in this meeting. Thank you to all organizations in Brazil for this invitation. When I was thinking about this conversation and I was talking to the executive director of the Climate Action Network that is going to be here tomorrow to share with the post-recap We always had this question on package that we need so that COP30 is successful. And it's clear to us that this idea of package is an idea concerning negotiation, things that should stay and things that should be left out because there's no political space. And as civil society, we don't want to be disconnected to what we could win. So it's clear that this COP30 is difficult from this standpoint, establishing what is the ambition package in this multilateral context, first of all, which is very complex. As Marshall said, this is a complex moment for international cooperation. We we not only have this horrible situation of genocide in Palestine, but let's see what's going to happen after the agreement. But it's a terrible moment that, and it's leaving many problems to the multilateral agenda. When we have the trade war, and we are trying to save ourselves in this context. And also, we came from a COP at Baku that was very difficult from the standpoint of civil society. And the result of the climate finance was a very deep one because we weren't able to agree something bold in terms of public financing. And the commitment of public financing from the developed countries to the developing countries. For those working with the climate agenda at national level, it seems to be something redundant. We always insist in the different categories, but this is the heart of the climate agreement, the Paris Agreement. If we didn't have this financial commitment, we wouldn't have what we have. And what we saw in Baku was this will to erase the commitments. And this is affecting the situation today. And we also have the lack of ambition in the uh, national determined contributions. Only a few countries uh, presented objectives, and the rich countries had uh, very little ambitious commitments. And, and also, we don't see commitments in the transition away from fossil fuels. So we have different elements that are key to this agenda that are not developed. And we also have the climate architecture funding, which is not in the agenda. So when we think about this package for COP, it's hard for us because there are priority items that are not in the agenda, but we have key topics in the agenda. And there's this risk in our mobilization as civil society that we don't see some traditional topics that are not in the agenda, for instance, climate funding and transitioning away from fossil fuels. So it may seems to us that they are not important items. And we also have items such as adaptation. We don't have people working on gender, and that should be solved at this COP. These are key topics in the perspective of climate justice. But the climate community is very much used with the topics that are always discussed. And as the Climate Action Network, we want to shed light to what is in the agenda, but we also want to bring other topics. That's the message we want to convey. In the segment of leaders that is happening before COP, we should have this strong political space so that the governments could recognize the lack of ambition at the NDCs and also the lack of ambition in the transition away from fossil fuel so that we can relieve the tension in the agenda that is being discussed. So we should have this agreement that could implement the just transition. For the climate space, we have subjects that seem to be new because they are not mitigation, adaptation, climate finance, and technology. But for the world that outside, this idea that the transition is being paid by people is evident. So the richest are not paying for the transition. And this is clear. And we must generate alternatives for everyone who is working and the communities that rely on the polluting system, the 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 exploitation system. But we don't see that at COP. That was only a sparse discussion here and there. So COP at Brazil means a key opportunity to be something else, something plus. And our mechanism of action from Belém concerning just transition, we want to develop that with other groups, and that gives us hope. So what gives us hope? This possibility of new conversations at COP, to be able to send a message to the world at this point of a crisis of multilateralism. So we have to think about how we could build climate policy. We know how to activate, we have goals, so how to make that work. So this is a debate that could be happening at COP, connecting different countries. Thank you.
Obrigado. Você veja, Rudy, que a Anabela falou, deu respostas e
Thank
falou
you,
de
Annabella.
esperança.
So
Agora
she's
falou
given
sobre
responses and she talked about hope.
esperança e
So,
resposta
Ruth,
dada pela
your
Anabela. Não, e é se
challenge
esperar até
is
chegar no ponto. Então, se preparem já. Por favor, Rudy.
to be even better. That's how it's going to happen until we get to Carlos. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rude Rafael. I'm from the movement of homeless workers at MTST in Brazil, and I'm also part of the political commission of the People's Summit. So Annabella has talked about many of the subjects I'd like to cover, but thinking about the challenge we have for this COP, the government has been working with this idea that we are going to have the blue zone, the green zone, and at this COP we are going to have a red zone, that is the People's Summit. And we dare say that this zone has many more colors. Of course, we have red in this moment when we are creating this anti-political feeling in society that is having an impact on the challenge to build public policies concerning the climate justice. So we have to be back to Jorge Richman. He says that our project should have all the colors from the rainbow. So the green from environment, the purple from the feminist movement, the white from the peace movement in this moment when the world is exploding in wars. And Minister Sonia just had that the budget to kill people is much greater than the budget to save people. So we're going to be at the People's Summit saying that the public money, the budget, and the direction of society should be such to defend life with the Black movement, with traditional territories. So creating this rainbow zone is the objective of the People's Summit. So this Rainbow Zone has a well-defined project. For instance, I'm part of this movement that is working with the peripheries, and our main element of work is the fight for housing. And we notice that we are not able to talk about housing only thinking about the housing deficit as we used to evaluate. We have cities that are excluding people, and to create cities that would include people, we should build X million houses. In the case of Brazil, 6 million houses. So we see that at each climate disaster we have, we need more and more houses. So we cannot think about the urban issue without thinking about the climate dimension. And understanding that this climate denialism has been generating more and more homeless people. So the message that the summit and the COP needs to send to the world is that overcoming this logic of the denialism, of anti-science, talking about this climate emergency and the challenge we have to build climate justice. And the People's Summit is a huge challenge because our expectation is to bring people together. We had more ambitious expectations, but the challenges that we are going to have building this summit, and we talk about the importance of the global south, of the Amazon, but it's also important to mention that we are going to build the People's Summit and COP in one of the most unequal capitals in the country. Belém is representing a lot of this snapshot of inequality, not only in Brazil, but in the global south. So we've been feeling this relief from the economic perspective in the country, pointing to this sovereignty journey, since we are feeling the attacks from imperialism. But the city of Belém is showing all the contradictions from the Brazilian society, uh, relying on capitalism, the same reality of countries who are competing for their place under the sun, with some climate comfort. But we have this challenge. We should remember that this COP is going to bring investments to this capital, and the investments uh, should be used by the population. We've been mobilizing more than 10,000 people from different social movements all around the world, and we must have this legacy in with the investments of the urban zone in the city that is reflecting a lot of inequalities. And as People Summit, we think about this challenge that is bringing together all the colors of the rainbow, all the processes of fight, resistance, and mobilization in the territory from six key axes on territory, the debate on territorial sovereignty and food sovereignty, historical reparation, this debate on how the Black movement and the indigenous movement have been contributing to debate environmental racism and the need to face the fake solutions and the corporate power in this conjuncture, the debate on just transition and popular justice of this new uh, people's international movement, building different international networks.
The letter of the People's Summit was already signed by 1,099 organizations, and we should think about how the organizations have incorporated the vocabulary and a set of practices that reflect the struggle for climate justice. Last week, Marcio was in an event of the trade union movement, and at some point on the environmental debate, we saw the trade union as one of the challenges because the defense of work in certain sectors that resulted in big environmental impacts was defended by the trade union. And it's beautiful to see this platform built by the trade unions of oil workers that are debating just transition as an element, as a key element. Just like us, urban movements who are thinking about how to redesign systems with a focus on the environmental debate. So we're not only struggling for housing or quality collective transportation and free collective transportation. That is a very strong debate in Brazil. The Workers' Party is incorporating the zero tariff discussion, and we have to work on this urban policy as a fundamental policy for the environment. I think there are challenges, but this is a hopeful scenario as well. When we look at this whole global mobilization and the possibility that we're going to have in People Summit to show the popular technologies that are being built in the territories. For example, how the process of solidarity kitchens that were built by MTST in the context of the pandemic and the Bolsonaro government when Brazil reached 33 million people in hunger. That was the technology of solidarity kitchens that allowed us and still allow us in extreme climate events to provide for these communities that are impacted by the extreme climate events. And they also inspire new technologies like sustainable solidarity kitchens that are being designed now by the federal government with biodigesters and solar energy. These are the kitchens that are going to feed the People Summit. So we should think about how a uh, set of popular and grassroots knowledge reflects on the reality of the territories. I think the idea is to advance in this debate of the just cities and the living urban peripheries and the axis of popular feminisms, how the women have struggled and built outcomes in their territories. My time is over. So, besides the advances in negotiations and the incorporation of concrete policies for climate justice, I think this network that will be maintained after the COP is one of the main responses, one of the main challenges, but also one of the main catalysts of this hope that we want to see multiplied all over the world. So we from the People Summit, we are completely embedded of this feeling of hope, but also of urgency and the responses that need to be given in these days in Belém and after Belém. Thank you, Rudy.
A Cúpula dos Povos, ela nasceu de uma reunião aqui em Brasília.
People Summit started from a meeting here in Brasilia, with national movements of Brazil and Latin America. It started in October 2023, so 2 years ago, and we already have these 1,100 organizations that show the capacity of mobilization of the agenda.
Já sabe, né? Esperanças, respostas.
Bueno, muy buenos días a todas y todos.
Well, thank you very much. Very good morning to everyone. I'm very happy with this invitation to be with all of the organizations that are part of this event. And I'm happy to be able to share with my colleagues here and with our dear moderator. I would like to start by all of you who are looking at the telephone, at your telephones. I was looking at my telephone a second ago. I would like you to put your phones down and stand up and let's clap for ourselves because this is the COP of adaptation, 30 years. Let's start with this energy of a round of applause. It's 30 years of struggle of the Global South and all of the different manifestations of civil society and the states, all of the actors that are part of the Global South. This is the adaptation COP, and I'm very happy. I would like to start like this, with this energy. And everything is hope. This is the COP of adaptation. You can take your seats again so I can start, I can continue with my other 6 minutes. This minute is for celebration. The rest of my minutes, I'm going to try to be very, very focused on what we need to build together to support the Brazilian presidency and all of our governments in Latin America, because this is also our COP of Latin America. And I would also like to share that with the world. We want to show what Latin America is, its vulnerabilities, but also its high commitments with adaptation in particular, and all of the topics in the agenda. I'm going to focus on adaptation because I have few minutes and my colleagues are going to talk about the other topics, and I'll also mention some words about finance. First of all, for us, it is key that this COP can be a clear quantitative and qualitative commitment for the financing of adaptation. We heard many voices and questions. They say we don't have a clear methodology of needs. This is true. Starting with Latin America, we were not able to do this quantification, but it doesn't need to be a hindrance. We have the Glasgow goal for finance of adaptation, which was minimum, but at least helps us visibilize and generate this process of continuation of international finance for adaptation, which is always below the goal in most of the cases. We also need a clear relationship between the processes. I'm sure that we all have heard that right now, after 30 years of process, we have a high fragmentation of the scenario of adaptation. We have many bodies, funds, and organizations created. We celebrate these organizations, but at the same time, we need them to make sense among themselves for the implementation of the collective goals, including the global goal on adaptation. So we are at a COP where for us it is very significant to be able to connect the dots, to be able to connect to what was done in the past. We need to do that, or else we're going to be left with a lot of concerns on this non-debate on the roadmap. I hope that the presidency can generate a good conversation on the roadmap and its connection with adaptation, which is not that clear yet. It is only a report that we don't understand well. I talked about the adaptation outcomes that we expect and why we need them. The adaptation agenda at COP is huge, and we're going to listen especially about the global goal on adaptation, but we're going to have many items of the agenda being discussed. The first challenge will be the time management. So we should think about which are these clear political signs that we need from the presidency and the civil society to support these signs so that we can have a result in the NAPs and the national adaptation plans. We know that we have had for a long time this agenda blocked. And why is it blocked? Because of finance, because of the non-acknowledgement of the needs and gaps of the developing countries when they implement their plans, because we did our task, we created our plans, and we are elaborating our monitoring system. But unfortunately, the finance is not getting to us, and the little finance that we have is locked. This is complex, especially for the most vulnerable ones. Now, focusing on GGA, we all know that we are in choosing the indicators. We heard a few ministers yesterday saying that there are too many indicators. We can have a smaller amount, but that is very complex for us. I'm not saying that it should be like that. I'm not saying it should be 100 or 10 indicators. I'm not advocating for a number. But we need to think about the list of indicators, and we need to think that this is a process of 10 years of political and technical work to streamline adaptation. This leads us to a process of pick and choose between the components. We need to include finance to technology, capacity building, gender and human rights, the indigenous peoples. How are we going to include the 7 topics and the 4 dimensions if we only have 10 indicators? The math doesn't work. We need our countries, our developing countries, not to have additional loads on them. So we have to advocate for an ambitious package with more accountability, so we don't have mechanisms clear, so we don't have challenges, so we have clear mechanisms of adaptation. We had a negotiation process during the bond workshops on how to embrace this list of indicators and how the participatory processes must follow us so that can be possible. I would like to say that this constant speech that adaptation is very difficult and technical, and now the indicators are very difficult and technical. I heard a few ministers saying that, talking about the civil society organizations. This has been a speech for 30 years that led us to inaction. Mitigation is supposedly easy, but I don't see it that way. I'm not against mitigation. Please don't take it that way. But what I want to show is that without adaptation, we lose every day a huge number of lives, of people, and properties. What we need to assess is this is the cup of life, cup 30, the cup of peoples. Brazil and its society and its civil society organizations managed to make this the cup of adaptation, and we should keep it till the end. The presidency needs to hear and understand that the results cannot be, the outcomes cannot be only a list, and we cannot leave here with empty hands in terms of participation. Because I don't see the implementation of a participatory adaptation process yet. We have to leave here with an implementation process considering the civil society. This cannot be an invitation only to participate at a round table every 2 years. We have to embrace adaptation and embrace life and embrace people. Cup of Brazil, the cup of Latin America. Thank you, Pilar. Thank you for coming. Thank you for participating in this panel with us. And I would like to ask 7 minutes for Carlos, the special envoy of COP for Africa. For the Brazilians, I hope you get used to my Portuguese accent. I'm coming from an African summit of climate with the participation of 25,000 delegates in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, where the debate was focused on 3 great challenges. I think these challenges are very relevant for the discussion today. I think it has a lot to do with the contextualization that we need to be able to prepare a good COP in Belém. The first challenge is that we got used to dividing the debate about development from the debate about climate. Now we start saying that they are connected. Of course, today we cannot have development without taking into consideration the climate change, and we cannot talk about climate without taking into consideration the development imperatives. But we still haven't translated this reality in terms of how we engage. The groups are organized throughout 30 years of COP on discussion hubs that are separate from the discussion hubs about development. When we started the discussion on human development, it is very simple in terms of equation. It is about increasing people's opportunities. For example, one of the definitions of human development is living a longer life. It's longevity. That increases people's opportunities. And another aspect is people having health, the metrics related to health. Because, of course, if we live with more health, we have more opportunities. Another aspect is having more access to resources. Well, we have more resources, we have more choices. Another one is education. If we are educated from the formal education standpoint, we're going to make better choices. This definition of human development has everything to do with the debate that we have about climate, because the debate about climate starts with this notion of sustainable development, and the notion of sustainable development is philosophically based on the principle of solidarity, intergenerational solidarity. We are protecting climate. We are protecting the planet because we want the next generations to have at least the same quality of life that we've had, and we want them to have even more life quality. And this struggle of to try to increase opportunities connects climate and development. But we have these discussions separately. And the way that we chose to work throughout time was saying that we have three pillars: economic, social, and environmental. We have people that only discuss the economic pillar, like the ministers of finance, the World Bank. They only discuss the economic pillar, and they skim over the other things, but not in detail, because it is something nice, it is something well seen to talk a little bit about society and environment, but they consider economics the fundamental pillar. And we have the other end of the spectrum, people that only talk about the environment, but they also discuss the rules of the market, the incentives of the private sector, in this environmental discussion. And because of these dichotomies, we have I like to call the cappuccino effect. If you like cappuccinos, you know that we need a strong espresso, and then we put some milk on the espresso, over the espresso, and then we put some foam or cinnamon or something to decorate the cappuccino. And that's how we treat these three pillars. The strong espresso is economy, and we put a little bit of cinnamon on top, which is the environment. And when things don't go well, we don't need the cinnamon, we have a latte. And if things are very, very bad, we say at least we have an espresso, which is the most important part.
And that has to change. We have to change this mindset. This is the first challenge. And the second challenge is the challenge of how we should develop this discussion on finance, because we believe that finance should come from aid. So we sit to negotiate. We've been doing that for 30 years to ask for more help. In the last 5 years, this discussion has evolved, and since we have a lot of debt because the aid was not according to expectations, it was it was much less. So we must introduce hybrid mechanism. We like this word leveraging in English, and it's a theater play, because deep down we are passing the cost of the commercial capital, pretending this is help. So the help is an incentive as an anchor to attract more, but the rest is commercial capital paid with market prices. So this discussion won't evolve, because even with the introduction of hybrid mechanism, with all the discussion on just transition, they are based on the donors' contributions according to different promises from part to part, and they haven't increased substantially the volume of funds necessary for climate action. So what's the problem? The problem is that we need to have these
Precisamos de
amounts,
negociar esses
yes,
montantes,
and we must
mas não
negotiate these
necessariamente tem que ser
amounts,
através
but not necessarily
tem que ser
through
através de regulação.
help. It
Tem que
should
ser
be
através
through
de mecanismos que são
regulation, through
impositivos, não
mechanisms
voluntários.
that are
Os
mandatory, not
NDCs são
voluntary.
voluntários.
The NDCs are
Nós precisamos de
voluntary.
ir além do
We
voluntário.
need to go
Nós
beyond.
precisamos de encontrar
We
onde é que
need
está
to find
o incentivo que impede
where's the
determinadas
incentive
ações
that
serem
will
feitas.
prevent some
Por exemplo,
actions to be
o
performed.
Banco
For
de
instance,
Regulação Internacional, fica em
the,
Basileia, na Suíça,
the International
que é o Banco
Regulation
Central dos
Bank
Bancos Centrais,
in Switzerland,
determina
the
as
Central
regras
Bank of Central
prudenciais,
Banks, is determining the
determina os
prudential
rácios
rules,
dos bancos,
the
determina como é
different
que os
bank
fundos de garantia devem
ratios,
funcionar.
how the
E
guarantee
todos
funds
eles
should work.
estão orientados
And all of them
para ignorar completamente
are
o
guided to
clima e o ambiente.
completely ignore climate
E
and the
enquanto nós não mudarmos
environment.
essas regras,
And while
vamos
we
continuar
don't
a discutir
change
ajuda.
these rules, we are going
Ajuda
to
é
keep discussing
compensação.
help. Help is
Nós temos que
compensation.
sair do debate da
We
compensação
must leave this
para o
debate on
debate da
compensation
regulação.
to this debate on
Tem que ser
regulation.
imposto.
This,
Tem que ser
this
através
must
dessas discussões.
be something
Então,
imposed through
a
these
sociedade civil tem aqui um
discussions.
papel
So civil
muitíssimo sério,
society has
que
a
é
very important
continuar
role,
a
that
pedir
is
aquelas somas, aqueles
requesting
montantes que são
the
importantes,
amounts that are
porque foram
important
identificados como
because they
necessários
were
para a
identified
transição,
as necessary
mas ao
for the
mesmo tempo
transition,
fazê-lo
but at the same
sem
time,
cair na tentação de
we must do
apenas
so
debater compensação.
without only debating
É
compensation.
debate
And
muito
it's
mais
a great
corajoso e muito
temptation.
mais importante.
It's a bolder
E o terceiro
and
desafio e o último
more
é
important
metodológico.
debate. And the third
Nós
challenge
vemos esta
is
COP, temos
methodology.
três plataformas. Temos a
At this
plataforma
COP, we have
da
three
negociação,
platforms: the negotiating
temos a
platform,
plataforma da ação
the action
e temos a
platform,
plataforma da mobilização.
and the
Ok?
mobilization action
E cada uma
platform.
delas
Sorry.
tem, digamos, os
And
seus
each one of them have
polos de atividade, as suas várias
different
formas de
activity
intervenção, engajamento,
hubs,
etc.
different
E é
ways
pouco
to
como o debate
engage.
sobre o cappuccino.
And
Nós
it's
não
like this
podemos
debate
separar a
on
negociação
cappuccino. We cannot
da ação
separate
e da mobilização.
negotiation from action
Porque
and
assim os
mobilization.
negociadores pensam que têm a mão livre para estar ali
Otherwise, the
fechados numa
negotiators
sala
believe that
a
they
decidir o
are
que lhes
free to be
apetece.
closed
Enfim, estou
enough room to
exagerando
decide.
para efeito dramático.
I'm exaggerating here for dramatic effects, of course, but
E ao mesmo tempo, quer dizer, os que
and
fazem a
at the same
mobilização e a
time,
ação
those who
estão
are
falando de outras
performing
coisas.
mobilization and
Nós
action, they are
temos que
talking
empurrar
about
essa
something
porta
else.
e entrar,
And we must
porque
push this
negociação
and
é
enter because
absolutamente fundamental.
negotiation is key.
Nós não obtemos neste tipo de quadro internacional
In
aquilo
this
que é justo. Nunca se obtém o que é
international
justo.
framework, we
Obtém-se
are
porque se
not able to
negocia.
obtain what is just.
Não se obtém
We
o que
are
é justo,
able
obtém-se o que
to
se negocia. Portanto,
able
o
to
imperativo
obtain
moral
what
de
we
justiça
negotiate.
tem que ser
This moral
usado em
imperative
termos de
of
força para
justice
abrir
must be
aquela porta da
used
negociação
to
e
force
para
that
obrigar os negociadores a
negotiation
tomarem-se em conta.
door,
Então,
to
aqui
make the
temos uma COP
negotiators
que é de
take it
mobilização
into account.
e uma COP
So
de
we have
inclusão.
this COP of
Esta é uma oportunidade
mobilization
e é
and
uma COP de
inclusion,
implementação.
so and an
Esta é uma
implementation
oportunidade
COP.
de
So this is
abrir
an
pouco essa
opportunity
porta,
for us to
porque
open this door
felizmente, para o
because
que eu estou a dizer, não para tudo, mas para o que eu estou a dizer, felizmente,
because
não ter
fortunately,
grandes ambições
not
de
having
negociação
great
é uma oportunidade
negotiation
para, de
ambitions,
facto,
it's an
mudar
opportunity
a
for
forma
us
de
to
negociar,
change the
a
way we negotiate,
metodologia da negociação. Portanto, eu
the
acho que esse é o grande
methodology
desafio.
for
E se nós tomarmos em
negotiation.
conta
So
estes
this is the
três desafios, nós
challenge.
estamos a falar,
If we don't
no fundo, de uma coisa
take
muito
into
simples,
account these three challenges,
que é
we are
como é que
talking
nós
about
podemos
something
transformar a
very
COP
simple, how we
num
can
mecanismo
transform
voltado para o
COP into a
futuro
mechanism
e não num mecanismo voltado para o legado.
toward the
Quando
future
você negocia
and not toward
e
the
está
legacy.
num processo que tem 30
When you
anos,
are in this
às
process
vezes
that
até um
has
pouco
been
mais,
taking 30 years, in reality, even more,
começa-se a sentir um pouco o
we
peso do
start
tempo.
to feel the
Nós
weight of
precisamos
time.
de inovação
We need innovation,
metodológica, orientativa,
methodological
programática,
innovation
para que os objetivos
with
sejam
new
mais ambiciosos.
guidelines and
O nível de ambição
programs
tem que
so that we
aumentar.
can have
E,
bolder
felizmente,
objectives.
fala-se muito hoje da
The
crise,
ambition
a
level
geopolítica não
must be
ajuda,
raised.
etc. É
We
verdade.
talked about
Mas se nós formos,
multilateralism, that the
como é
political
o meu
ambition
caso,
is not helping.
para
This is true, but
debate
if we go
como
to a
aquele que teve
debate
lugar em Addis Abeba, na
as the
África,
one we
e
had in
na
Addis
China, que está a
Abeba
ter
in
lugar aqui no
Africa,
Brasil,
and I
e tudo
imagine that
aquilo
is
que
happening
o Rudy
here
nos
in
disse,
Brazil,
a Pilar nos disse, a Anabela nos disse, nós devemos
considering
chegar, de facto, a
everything
uma
that
grande
Rude
ambição.
Annabella and Pilar told us,
nos Estados
we
Unidos.
see that there's room
Portanto,
for a lot of
este
ambition,
gap
and the ambition is
é o nosso
increasing.
desafio.
So this gap is our
Obrigado,
challenge.
Carlos.
Thank you, Carlos.
Muito bem, temos um pouquinho de tempo, não é, Maria?
So we still have some time,
Não, mas essa mesa ela é marcada pelo brilhantismo e pontualidade.
but
Então,
this table is
obviamente,
very
temos um pouco de
bright
tempo.
and
Então, nós
very
vamos fazer o
punctual.
seguinte,
So we
Maria
still
vai
have time. So Maria is going to help us.
Maria vai nos ajudar.
Maria
Nós vamos abrir para 3 perguntas ou
is going to
considerações
take the mic, and we are going to
breves, e
open
aí
for 3 questions
retorna
or remarks, very brief, and then we are going to come back to the table to
levanta a
close.
mão.
If you
Maria
want
vai
to use the mic, please
diversidade,
raise your
no
hand.
que
Maria is going to guarantee
falar,
diversity,
e aí depois a gente retorna.
and
Perguntas,
then we
considerações.
return.
Eu vou
Questions,
usar uma das três
considerations.
pessoas, porque daí a gente faz as três perguntas e eles já respondem.
We
Então já temos
I'm
o
going to
Davi,
choose the 3 people,
mais
then
duas
we ask the
perguntas,
3 questions. So we have
considerações,
one here,
inquietações,
2 other
angústias.
people. Do you have
Temos dois
questions,
homens.
remarks? We have 2 men.
Alguma mulher?
Any woman would like
Mulheres.
to say something? Women?
Alguma terceira voz?
A third voice?
Vou abrir mão de ser mulher. Pronto, aí temos as três.
Great, we have 3 people now.
Daí a gente escuta as três perguntas e eles
And then
respondem
we're
numa
going
rodada
to
só.
take the 3
Pode se
questions and they
apresentarem,
are
por
going
favor.
to answer only once.
sou
You may
Roberto
introduce
Francini
yourself.
Júnior,
I'm
Roberto
Roberto Francini
Hoje estou
Júnior.
como
I
coordenador da
am
região que
the
Mata
coordinator
Atlântica
of the NGO
e
networks
gostaria de
at the
comunicar
Atlantic
profissionalmente que nós
Forest.
teremos
And I'd
na
like to
UNAMA,
say
a
that
Casa da
we
Mata
are going to
Atlântica,
have at
vai
UNAMA,
ter
the
uma
House
série
of
de
the
eventos
Atlantic
do dia 12
Forest.
até o
We
dia
are going to have
16
many
para
events
discutir
from
o bioma Mata
12
Atlântica
to
dentro dessa
16
COP,
to
que
discuss the
estando na
biome of
Amazônia,
Atlantic
obviamente a
Forest
discussão se
during the
foca muito
COP.
lá e a gente quer
So
trazer o
the
bioma da Mata
focus is
Atlântica para
going to
discutir
be
aqui.
on
Eu
the
queria
Amazon, and we wanted
que
to
o
bring
Carlos pudesse desenvolver
the
um
Amazon,
pouquinho mais
the
essa
Atlantic
questão que
forest
ele
to the
coloca
discussion.
dessa
So I'd
mudança
like
de
Carlos to
paradigma com
discuss a little
relação a
bit
como
more
vem
about
se
this
encarar
shift of
todas essas
paradigm,
mudanças. Eu achei
how
que
we
foi uma
should
fala
face
que
the
me tocou
different
muito
changes.
profundamente, porque
So
eu
your
acho que a gente
speech has touched
não está
me
tendo um
deeply
gap
because we don't
de
have
mudança
this gap
do
of
que se
change.
discute e do nosso modelo.
A
A
gap between what's
sustentabilidade,
been discussing and our
muitas
model.
coisas que eu estudo e já estudei, né, sustentabilidade
Sustainability,
dentro do
according to
capitalismo
what I've
não
studied,
prospera por conta das próprias
is
contradições
not
do capitalismo.
thriving in
Então, de que forma
capitalism
que a
due
gente,
to
dentro
capitalism's
dessa conjuntura, pode
contradictions. So, how
avançar
can we
com
advance
relação às
within this
negociações
conjuncture
para que haja uma mudança
concerning
efetiva de
negotiations so that
comportamento,
we
né?
can have this
Considerando, inclusive,
um,
também que a
behavioral
própria educação não
shift,
está
considering
incorporando
that
essas
education
questões
is not
na formação
incorporating
dos
these
seus
issues
súditos, que
in
está
the training
tendo
of
com
this
produções em massa,
youth
com
that is
privatização
coming
dos
with mass
modelos
production,
educacionais,
with
né?
the privatization
E
of
também
educational
acredito que isso é
models.
de maneira
And I
impositiva,
also
mas é de
believe
maneira
that
impositiva.
this
Dentro do
is
modelo
something in
democrático
positive,
também é muito
but
complexo.
within this
Então, só
democratic
para
model,
desenvolver um
this is
pouco
also
mais isso, que
very
eu achei que é
complex. So
muito
could you
significativo.
develop
Obrigado.
your thoughts on that?
Muito obrigada. Eu vou fazer
Thank
as
you.
três, tá?
I'm going to ask the three questions, okay?
E daí eu vou pedir para vocês
And
aqui da
then
cruz ficarem em pé, para ficar melhor.
please
Quem foi que levantou
stand.
a mão? Foi você? Não.
Who was the
Desculpa.
person who raised their hands?
Olá, bom
Hello.
dia a todas e todos.
Good
Meu nome é
morning,
Lucas
everyone. My name
Veloso,
is Lucas
sou
Veloso.
pós-doc em ciência política na
I am
UFMG e trabalhando com a
studying my
Fundação
PhD
ISE
at
num projeto de
UFMG,
experimentar
and I'm
e
working with Easy
divulgar a
Foundation
ideia de
in
assembleias
order
cidadãs
to
globais
disclose this
para
idea of
injetar, né, voz,
citizen
cocriação
assemblies to
e
inject
demandas
voices,
cidadãs na governança
co-creation,
global, né?
and
E
citizen
minha
demands
pergunta vai
in
nessa
global
direção
governance.
que o Rafael
And my
do
question
MTST está colocando, né?
is
E a gente
to
acabou de lançar um paper, né?
Rafael
A
from
Fundação ISE,
MTST. We just
identificando que as
launched
pessoas estão
a
nos seus
paper at our
territórios,
foundation,
né? As povos
identifying that
indígenas,
people
pessoas
are in
mais
their
diversas, né?
territories,
Debatendo,
indigenous peoples,
discutindo,
diverse people,
co-criando,
debating,
fazendo, né?
co-creating,
A
discussing,
resiliência ambiental,
bringing
contribuindo para a
climate
democracia.
resilience and
Nosso
contributing
projeto
to
é construir
democracy.
não
Our
só uma
project
Assembleia
is to
Global,
build not
mas
only
uma
this global
plataforma
assembly,
digital
but
que
a
conecte
digital
todos
platform
esses
that could
esforços
connect
dois
all these
governos estados
efforts
para
that are
somar
fragmented
introduzir
today,
diferença
so that we
concreta
can
na
introduce
governança global do
concrete
mundo. Como que vocês estão vendo
diversity in
esses
this global
desafios e oportunidades, né,
governance. So
de
how do you see the
conectar
challenges and
todos
opportunities to
esses
connect
milhares de esforços que
all
estão
the
difusos hoje
efforts that
no
are
planeta?
disseminated in
Muito
the planet
obrigado.
today? Thank you so much.
Bom dia.
Good
Meu
morning.
nome é Rogeni.
My name
Eu
is
trabalho na
Rogeni.
Fundação Avina.
I work at
Integro as
Fundación
equipes
Avina.
dos
I'm part
projetos
of the
Marajó
teams
Resiliente,
of
que é um
Marajó
projeto de
Resilient
adaptação
Project.
climática em
That
3
is a
municípios
climate
do Marajó.
adaptation project
E o
with three
projeto Vozes pela
municipalities
Ação
at
Climática
Marajó, and the
Justa,
project
que é um
Voices for the
projeto que
Just
tem
Climate
conduzido
Action. That is
desde
a project that has
2021
been contributing
para
since 2021
impulsionar as
to
vozes
drive
locais
the local
nessa agenda
voices
climática.
in this climate
E,
agenda.
ouvindo o painel,
And I
acho que
was
foi a
listening to this
Pilar que
panel, and
chamava a
I
atenção
believe that
para
Pilar was
esse
talking
perigo
about
dessa
this danger
narrativa que tem
of
apontado a adaptação
this
climática como uma
narrative
questão
that has
técnica.
been
E
saying that the
estando
climate issue is a
vivenciando essa
technical issue.
experiência lá no
Since we are
Marajó, algo que
living this
está
experience in
muito forte
Marajó,
em nossa
something that
aprendizagem
is
é que
very
as
strong in our
comunidades
learning
elas já
lessons
vivem
is
o
that the
processo de
communities are living
adaptação
this
e
process of
elas têm
adaptation,
construído
and they have been
alternativas
building
de adaptação e
alternatives
que nós que estamos atuando
to
nessa
adapt.
agenda
And us who are working
precisamos
with this agenda,
ter
we
essa
need to have
sensibilidade e
this
esse olhar
sensitivity
para se apoiar nessa prática no sentido de
so that we can use this
fortalecê-las, né?
practice as a
Além do
basis,
mais,
and
não é
also we should
só o
strengthen the
termo,
initiatives.
só essa perspectiva da adaptação climática ser tratada como algo
And
técnico, como também
the climate
o
adaptation
discurso de que
shouldn't be treated as
financiamento
something
climático
technical.
é um
And
tema
also,
para
this
especialistas. Então,
climate
nós
discourse
precisamos, enquanto
is being
organizações da
seen as something
sociedade
for
civil,
experts. So, as
avançar
organizations
cada
from
vez mais no
from
sentido
civil
de
society, we must
desconstruir,
advance
né, estas
to
narrativas que acabam
debunk these
sendo
narratives that
narrativas
end up
excludentes.
being
Né?
excludent
E
narratives.
a outra questão que eu gostaria, né, de também e trazer a pergunta
And
aqui
I
para
would
a
like to
mesa
ask
é sobre
to
como
the
nós
panel,
podemos avançar ainda mais
how could
para
we
ampliar a
advance even further
representatividade
to
da
enhance the
sociedade nesses
representativeness of
espaços de
society
discussão
in
da
these
agenda
discussion
climática, né?
spaces on
Olhando aqui
climate
mesmo para nós, me
agenda?
parece que ainda falta a gente avançar muito em
Observing the
termos dessa
audience, it seems to me
representatividade,
that we must advance a
especialmente
lot
em
in
se
terms of
tratando das
representativeness,
organizações de
especially when we
base
talk
e
about
das
grassroots
periferias.
organizations and peripheral
Alguém aqui
organizations.
citou, né, por
Someone
exemplo,
mentioned here
essa
that
zona
we
vermelha.
had this
Nós
red
temos em
zone.
Belém, por exemplo,
In
uma
Belém, for
experiência
instance, we
que
have this
precisa talvez
experience
ser mais valorizada e
to
ampliada, que
be
é
appreciated and
as zonas
enhanced,
amarelas, né,
which
que é
are
uma
the yellow zones.
iniciativa que vem sendo liderada pela
This
COP das
is an
Baixadas, que é um
initiative that is
movimento
being
da
led
periferia
by
de Belém,
the
que
COP of
vem
Baixadas, a
levando todas
movement
essas
from the
discussões
peripheries of
para esses
Belém
espaços que estão
that are
normalmente
taking
excluídos dessas
the
discussões. Então,
discussions
eram
to
essas as questões que eu
these
gostaria de trazer aqui.
exclusive
Obrigada.
spaces. So
Muito
these are the points I'd
obrigada.
like to bring.
E agora
Thank you.
devolvo para a mesa a
Thank you.
missão
And now back to
de
the
até 10
panel
minutos
members.
vocês
So you have the
formularem
mission
essas perguntas e
to
provocações.
answer the
Obrigada.
questions
Então,
in
eu vou convidar
10
vocês, cada um,
minutes.
para falar. Mas
So
lembrando
each
que a gente
one
pode
of you
pedir
is
ao
going
pessoal
to
se a gente
speak,
fazer
and
perguntas
we
curtas
could
agora, depois fazer um
have
café.
short
Então
responses
tem
now, and then
também
you're going
rede
to
de
have a
café
coffee
para
break,
um
and
detalhamento
we
mais
still have the
específico.
coffee
Eu queria
break
só
time
acrescentar uma
for
coisa
more
que eu vi
details.
das três perguntas, que é com
And I'd
relação à
like to bring
representatividade,
together
imposição, quer
the
dizer,
three
nós
questions
termos mais
concerning
força na agenda.
representativeness and
Essa
the
força ela pode
position
se
of
dar,
different
e a
topics.
pergunta de
So
vocês,
we should be
através de termos mais
stronger in this
crachados,
agenda.
mas
But
também
should we
através de
have
termos
more
mais
badges,
gente na
or
rua,
should we have more
né?
people on the streets?
Pressão do lado de fora.
We should
Eu aprendi com uma
have
companheira
more
do
pressure from the
MST, que é o
outside.
Movimento Sem
I've
Terra,
learned
no
from
Brasil, que normalmente
this
os
colleague
tomadores
from
de decisão
MST
em
that
qualquer
normally
lugar
the
do mundo,
decision makers
eles
anywhere in the
funcionam
world,
da
they
mesma forma
work
como
the
funciona
same
você
way
fazer
as it
feijão.
works for
Você
us
tem
to
que
make
pôr pressão.
beans. We must
senão o
put
feijão não fica
pressure.
bom,
Otherwise,
senão a decisão é
the beans are
tomada.
not going to be good and you don't have the decisions. So I
Essa é
wanted
a
to
razão do
listen
quanto que
from
a
you
gente é efetivo do
about
lado de
that.
dentro das
If
salas,
should be
mas também
effective
precisamos aumentar a
within
pressão
the
nos
rooms, but
funcionários.
also should we increase the pressure outside of the rooms?
Sim, acho que da mesma forma, vou só pedir
So
para
let's
ser bem
start the same
rápido,
way. Please
minuto,
be
minuto e
brief,
meio.
1 minute,
Não, oito
not
minutos é
8
para
minutes.
todos.
8 minutes to all.
Es una reflexión interesante porque sí, hace falta presión, pero también
This
necesitamos
is
poder.
something interesting because we must
Poder.
put pressure, but we also need power. If we are where we are as society, as climate movement, as social movement, this is the result of a force relation that is not favorable to us. To me, one of the reasons that we lack power has to do with that. Now, thinking about the climate movement, that has to do with our difficulty to believe in the importance of the social agenda concerning inequality and all the points that Carlos raised. If you're not aware that advancing in this agenda to reduce inequality and also to have economic progress and to have more industries, so this is key for us to advance in this serious climate agenda. If we don't do that, we will be weak. We will be in demonstrations with our flags, but people won't listen to us. And how do we build that? To me, the how is key. Today, if we have low quality environmental objectives with weak national contributions, that's because people are afraid on the impact in their lives. And also because there's no national plan. We don't have planning in general concerning the different routes and different ways, and this is being used against us. So to me, this idea of this just transition and being based on this how that has to do with the reduction of emissions and also adaptation. And we must work with this 45 degrees Celsius heat. People who are dying working in civil construction. And what is the rights? What are the rights of these people? So how could we adapt our economies? And this is cross-cutting. We must have space in the United Nations. We have different ideas on how a COP should evolve. And according to our expectations, maybe we could evaluate this bad measure. At this moment when the United Nations were establishing rules and standards, and this is the goal and we should go here, this has disappeared. It's not working like that, not only at COP, because the states didn't want to give up sovereignty so that we could have this common norm.
That doesn't mean that the COP is not good for something. For me, it's good for two things: to continue talking about the finance issue because we need accountability and accounting, and to give legitimacy to all of our movements that have ideas, have proposals. And when the United Nations agree and the governments agree that these rights and this participation, that ideas like justice are worth it, they give the grounds to the movements. They give us also legitimacy to seek more ambition. So we're going to COP also to seek legitimacy for our ideas and more resources so that we can accelerate the implementation.
Primeiro dizer que eu gostei muito das
First, I
analogias
would like to say that I really like the analogies with food, the cappuccino effect.
Mas eu acho que isso também aproxima, né, o debate das
The
pessoas.
beans analogy as well, but I think it also approximates COP from and people, how to popularize and generate mobilization and organization in this agenda that we defend. I think there's an important element of learning in this situation, and I think the People Summit reflects that because the Brazilian government, for example, attracted many mega events based on this logics of multilateralism. We had in 2023, so the Mercosur, and we developed Mercosur Social. Last year we had G20, and we thought about G20 Social. It is important to build formal spaces of representation. And this element of representation and experimentation, a methodology that builds in the space of the COB autonomous zones. We have lived in the last 3 years a narrowing of our political horizons. I think this element of ambition, when it is in our debate, it is very important for us to resume this capacity of the utopias. I think this is what the People Summit stands for. There's also a coordination of a debate of the Global South that points to that. When would we imagine that in G20, the protagonism of the Brazilian government would have as a commitment from G20 a global alliance against hunger, poverty, and the taxation of big fortunes? That is something that we achieved here in Brazil with the street mobilizations, make the Congress that is today taken by the physiological interests and the extreme right approve the exemption of income tax for people who receive up to 5 salaries and in positive mechanisms to regulate and tax the fortunes. We have to have this positive agenda, as Annabella said, a project of territorial sovereignty, but also of a country that has the purpose of thinking a logics of development that is based on these experiences that are brought to us. As social movements, we don't want an aid policy. We build an abundance policy in our territory, saying that building houses is possible. A country that is one of the biggest producers of food in the world cannot have hunger. There has to be food, quality food at the table with the logics of agroecology. That is the experience that we want to bring to the world. Public policies that are based on this reference. So I think the People Summit has been doing this with hundreds of debates that we are organizing, and we send a very clear message that despite these axes that I mentioned here, the idea is to build connections, and we're not going to have a setback in this process. These 1,100 organizations of the summit will become 10,000 and 20,000, and we're not going to have a setback in this process of organization and in the defense of a concrete platform to defend this ideal of climate justice. This is the hope that we have and the response that we expect from the COP.
Bueno, con respecto a, me voy a referir a dos de los puntos que
regarding the 2 points that were mentioned, especially by our colleague Annabella, regarding the narrative. We talked a lot in the last year with a lot of organizations that are represented here about the importance of changing the narrative of adaptation. This narrative is very developed now. Not only regarding what we mentioned before technically, but this dichotomy between local and global, unfortunately, that has not been useful, because if it is a very global narrative, we cannot discuss local issues. If it's too local, we cannot have the perspective of global issues. So this dichotomy is complicated. It is politically insensible and technically impossible. The change of narrative, as my colleague said, and you also said during your presentations, is the look to the outlook of the rights and the sustainable development, these perspectives should not be rivals. They should be complementary. And it is deeply rooted in rights and climate justice for the future. The second component has to do with participation, inside and outside. In the end of my speech, I mentioned this because we always have this concern that if the convention is opening and giving room for more participation in terms of workshops and activities, then the process continues working. We need to have a true participatory process, and adaptation is a clear example. And this COP, the organizations that are out of the process, they want this COP to be a COP of adaptation. And we should think about the Global South that did not have these tools, that didn't manage to have these tools throughout this year. This is the time to have them. We need to generate new mechanisms and empower and accompany all of the grassroots organizations. We did that with Avena. In Avena, we have a program called COCO, the co-construction of adaptation indicators, where we can have this process of indicators and the discussion on adaptation indicators for all of the teams. We have over 42 organizations in Latin America working on that. This is a wonderful space to share as well. If you want to know more about it, we can talk during the coffee break. I agree with Marcio. We're not going to manage to have all of the actors in this process. I'm sure that the people's pressure on the streets, with the local government participating, they need to be part of the conversation. These are very important actors in the conversation of adaptation. On the streets, on the public spaces, claiming, because that is where adaptation came from the voices, the impacts, the risks of seeing what is happening on the streets. It came from fear, but it also came from hope of having an opportunity, and we cannot neglect it. We have a very narrow window. This is my call for collective action today. Thank you very much. I'm going to be brief because my colleagues already and the colleagues from the panel already covered the questions, but I'm going to say something very simple. We talk about carbon credit, for example, just an example. But in reality, if we look at the countries that did not contribute to the problem of climate change, these countries already have a carbon credit because they were not responsible for the problem. If we accept this principle, the countries that caused the problem have a carbon debt. And instead of discussing sovereign debt, we should be discussing the carbon debt. Instead of discussing concessional funds, when in reality, because of the international regulation, Germany can ask for loans at 0%. The African countries ask loans at 11%. The terminology is used for us. And we can continue with a lot of examples like protectionism. We can be against protectionism and on behalf of liberal economy, but the countries that practice protectionism on behalf of climate, they're the countries that cause the problem. Because of the terminology, we're having a completely out of standard discussion sometimes, and we need to change that. And in order to change that, we need willpower, not only ambition, but willpower. Willpower to change the terms of the debate. Thank you very much, Carlos. The idea of this roundtable, this panel, is to bring a general context of the COP, the pre-COP, and the position of the civil society. I think some points here were made very clear by you. And maybe COP is not going to have a single point as we have sometimes in a conference. We have several topics like the NDCs, fossil fuels, adaptation, and a more comprehensive point, which is just transition. All of that in a month from now, but not only a month from now. I would like to remind you of something very important that Annabella mentioned and Rudy mentioned. The climate conferences, they happen for 2 weeks. The year has 52 weeks. So in the other 50 weeks, many other things have to happen with the same or even more intensity than we usually apply to the subject throughout these 2 weeks of the climate conference. I think this is a big construction that we have ahead of us. I would really like to thank you all. You created a problem because you raised the bar a lot for our debates, and then the next tables are going to have to repeat or overcome or raise this bar even further. Thank you very much for the participation, and now Maria is going to give us the instructions on how we will continue.
Só uma foto oficial da mesa, por
Just an
favor.
official photo of the panel, please.
Gente, a gente vai ter agora aquele
Guys, now
intervalo
we're going to have that break that I mentioned, the longer break, to allow you to exchange and get to know each other and connect. But before, we have a few things to do. After the coffee break, we're going to have the first simultaneous dialogue. We're going to have a group talking here and another group talking in the Alvorada room. These wonderful people in black are going to guide you to the next room if you want to go to the other dialogue. We're going to leave the slide projected if you want to read a little bit more, but in this room, we're going to have to talk about nature and biodiversity. What is the role of peoples and the forest in COP30? And in the Alvorada room, we're going to talk about NDCs and how to deal with this ambition gap. So you can choose which dialogue you want to take part in. Some important points. The receivers for translation here, they do not work on the next room. So if you're going to Alvorada room, you give your receiver back and take another one when you get there. We're going to change the furniture a little bit around. So if you want to keep your things here, just be aware that we're going to switch the chairs around. At 4:30, we return on YouTube. So just for you guys who are watching on YouTube, and we would like to take a family photo now, an official group photo. If we can invite the people who are outside, that is also very important to have their participation and have everyone here for this photo. We want to have this photo of the Atos Vulcão panel. This is the biggest panel, the biggest art of Atos Vulcão. So we have an amazing work of art of the first hotel of Brasilia. Here, Juscelino Kubitschek did the whole planning of Brasilia. So if you don't know, this is a landmark of Brasilia. So let's just wait for people to get here. I would really like everyone to be in this photo. This is going to be the official photo of the event. So if you want to come here in the front so we don't leave a gap in here.
A foto vai ser do palco.
The photo is going to be from the stage to this wall. Everybody here will appear on the photo.
Não, acho que só tem no fundo. Então é aquilo. Quem está dentro da sala vai aparecer na foto.
So those who are in the room are going to be in the photo. I'm not going to be up front. I'm just going to sit down here.
Quem quiser vir sentar aqui, ó, nesse sofá na frente.
So if you want to sit down on this couch here in the front so that it does not look empty.
Equipe, acho que vocês têm que vir para a foto também.
Team, I think you should be included in the photo too.
Tá. O pessoal está entrando.
People are coming
Adriana, tá
in.
bom? Podemos sorrir?
Adriana, is it okay?
Então,
Can
vamos
we
lá,
smile?
gente.
So let's smile, guys.
Oi? Eba!
Great.
Pessoal, última coisa. Somos responsáveis pelo tempo.
Last thing, we are responsible for the time. So when the girls start calling you in, let's go to our respective rooms, okay? We'll have half an hour.